The sky above Valerian Prime burned red with fire as the Krell ships descended like locusts onto the peaceful world below. Ambassador Kalira stood at the window of the High Council chamber and watched her civilization crumble before her eyes. The elegant towers that had stood for centuries collapsed under the bombardment. The gardens that her people had tended with love for generations turned to ash and smoke. The Valari were a gentle species who had never known true war. Their ancestors had evolved on a world of plenty where cooperation meant survival and violence meant death. For millions of years they had refined the art of peace and pushed away the darker instincts that haunted other species. Now that choice was destroying them. High Arbiter Serenus collapsed into his chair with his long fingers trembling. The Valari were tall and thin with skin that shimmered like mother of pearl. Their large eyes could see colors that most species could not perceive. Their minds were sharp and creative, but their bodies were fragile, and their spirits were not built for combat. Serenus looked at the tactical display where red markers showed Krell forces overwhelming their defenses. The Valari had weapons designed to disable and deter, but nothing that could match the brutal efficiency of an invasion fleet. Within 3 weeks, the Krell would control every major city on the planet. Kalira tore her eyes from the burning sky and turned to face the council. She was younger than most of the assembled leaders, but her voice carried weight earned through years of diplomatic service. She had traveled to distant worlds and spoken with dozens of species. She understood the galaxy better than most of her people. That understanding now filled her with dread. The Galactic Accord had no answer for the Krell. The peaceful alliance of species that the Valari belonged to had debated and discussed and accomplished nothing while world after world fell to the swarm. The Accord valued consensus and careful deliberation. The Krell valued only expansion and consumption. "We must send the call," she said, and her voice cut through the despair that filled the chamber. The council members looked at her with confusion and fading hope. What call, they asked? Who would answer when the entire Accord has abandoned us? Kalira straightened her shoulders and met their eyes. "We send a distress call to everyone. Not just the Accord, but every species in the database. Every civilization we have ever documented. Someone out there must have the strength to fight. Someone must be willing to help." Serenus shook his head slowly. "You know what that means, child. You know who might answer such a call. The quarantined species. The ones too dangerous for contact. The predators." Kalira felt her chest tighten, but she did not look away. "Yes," she said quietly. "The predators. Because right now we need predators more than we need philosophers. We need warriors more than we need poets. We are dying, and I would rather live under the protection of dangerous allies than die with our principles intact." The council argued for an hour, but the sound of explosions growing closer ended the debate. They gave Kalira permission to broadcast the call. She ran through corridors filled with smoke and frightened people until she reached the communication hub. The technicians there were preparing to evacuate, but they stopped when they saw her. She explained what she needed and they set to work with shaking hands. Within minutes, they had prepared a transmission that would reach across known space on every frequency the Valari had ever documented. Kalira stood before the recorder and took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "This is Ambassador Kalira of Valerian Prime broadcasting on all frequencies. We are a peaceful people under attack by the Krell swarm. Our defenses have failed. Our allies cannot help us. We are calling out to anyone who can hear this message. We need military aid. We need warriors. We will give anything to whoever can save us. Our coordinates are attached. Please, if there is anyone out there with the strength to fight, please come. We are dying." The transmission went out across the galaxy and Kalira waited for a response that might never come. The technicians evacuated and she followed them into the underground bunkers where thousands of Valari huddled in darkness. The next weeks were a blur of fear and loss. The Krell landed their forces and began the systematic harvesting of the planet. Valari were rounded up and processed. Cities were stripped of resources. The orbital space became a graveyard of destroyed ships and stations. Every day Kalira checked for responses to the distress call. Every day there was only silence. Then on the 21st day, a message arrived. It was heavily encrypted, and it took the surviving technicians hours to decode it. When they finally broke through the security protocols, the message was simple and direct. Hold position. The Terran Defense Fleet is inbound. Estimated arrival 6 standard days. Kalira stared at the words and felt her blood turn cold. Terran. She knew that name. Every educated Valari knew that name. The humans. The Deathworlders. The quarantined species that the Galactic Accord had deemed too dangerous for contact. She pulled up the archived file on humanity and read it with growing unease. Terra was classified as a Category 4 Death World, the highest danger rating possible. The planet featured extreme weather patterns, aggressive predators, deadly microorganisms, and environmental hazards that would kill most species within hours. Humanity had evolved in this hellscape, and it showed in every aspect of their biology and psychology. They were apex predators with forward-facing eyes and grasping hands. Their bodies were dense with muscle and bone built to survive high gravity and physical trauma. Their minds were wired for pattern recognition, strategic thinking, and most terrifying of all, organized violence. The report detailed first contact between humanity and the Galactic Accord 2 centuries earlier. The humans had developed faster than light travel and reached out to the galaxy with excitement and hope. They wanted to join the community of civilized species. They wanted to share knowledge and culture. But when the Accord evaluated them, the decision was unanimous. Humanity was too dangerous. Their history was filled with warfare and conquest. Their instincts were aggressive and territorial. Their capacity for violence was unmatched by any known species. The Accord placed them under quarantine and forbade contact until humanity could prove they had evolved beyond their predatory nature. Kalira felt sick as she read the file. She had called for help and received an answer from the one species the galaxy feared most. What had she done? Would the humans save them only to enslave them? Would they be trading Krell masters for human ones? She broadcast the news to the other bunkers and watched as hope mixed with fear in the eyes of her people. Some celebrated that help was coming. Others wept at what that help might cost them. Kalira understood both reactions. She felt them herself. The 6 days of waiting felt endless. The Krell continued their operations with mechanical efficiency. More Valari disappeared into processing centers. More resources were stripped from the planet. The survivors huddled in their bunkers and listened to the sounds of destruction above. Kalira spent the time preparing. She gathered what remained of the government. She organized the surviving military, personnel even though they had nothing left to fight with. She tried to maintain order and hope while her own heart filled with doubt. On the morning of the 6th day, the sensors detected something at the edge of the system. The readings were massive. Energy signatures beyond anything the Valari had ever recorded. One by one, ships began appearing in real space as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The Valari technicians counted them with shaking hands. Dozens of ships. Then hundreds. The human fleet had arrived, and it was larger than anything they could have imagined. At the center was a vessel so massive it dwarfed the largest Krell carrier. The sensors identified it as the TDS Vanguard. Around it flew cruisers and destroyers, and countless smaller craft all bristling with weapons. Kalira watched the display with her heart pounding. The human ships looked nothing like the elegant vessels of the Galactic Accord. They were brutal slabs of metal and armor covered in weapon systems. They moved with predatory grace, forming a battle line between the Krell forces and Valerian Prime. For a long moment there was silence. Then a transmission came through on all frequencies. The voice was deep and calm with an accent Kalira had never heard before. "This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. Stand by for combat operations. Keep your heads down and we will handle the rest." Kalira felt tears stream down her face. They had come. Against all odds and across the vastness of space, the humans had come. Whether they were saviors or simply a different kind of conqueror remained to be seen. But they were here and they were ready to fight. The Krell had awakened something that had been sleeping at the edge of known space. They had drawn the attention of the Deathworlders, and now they would learn what it meant to face humanity in battle. The Krell responded to the human fleet with the same efficiency they applied to everything. Their ships moved into attack formation, launching thousands of drone fighters and preparing boarding craft. They had conquered dozens of worlds using these tactics. They had overwhelmed every defense they encountered through sheer numbers and relentless assault. The Krell Hive commander broadcast a standard demand for surrender in the harsh clicking language of the swarm. The message was simple: submit or be destroyed. The Krell had never met resistance they could not break. Admiral Morrison received the transmission and listened to it in silence. The bridge of the Vanguard was a study in controlled chaos. Officers called out readings and tactical updates while holographic displays showed the positions of both fleets. The Admiral was a man in his 50s with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen too many battles. He had commanded the Terran Defense Fleet for a decade and led humanity through conflicts that most species could not imagine. He studied the Krell formation for a moment, then opened a channel on all frequencies. His response was calm and matter-of-fact. Negative. You have got 5 minutes to withdraw from this system. After that, we are coming through you. In the bunkers below, Kalira heard the exchange and felt her breath catch. The Admiral spoke like he was discussing the weather, not facing an armada that had destroyed countless civilizations. She looked at the other Velari gathered around the communication console. They were all thinking the same thing. Either the humans were incredibly brave or they were insane. Perhaps both. The 5 minutes passed in tense silence. The Krell did not withdraw. They had never withdrawn. Their biological programming did not allow for retreat. They would fight until they won or until they were destroyed. Morrison watched the countdown reach 0, then gave a single order. All ships advance. Fire at will. The Terran fleet surged forward, and the space between the two armadas erupted in violence. The human ships did not wait for the Krell to reach them. They pushed into the enemy formation, launching coordinated strikes that tore through the Krell vanguard. Railguns fired metal slugs at a fraction of light speed, punching through armor like paper. Missile batteries released swarms of nuclear-tipped warheads that detonated in brilliant flashes of light. Point defense systems tracked and destroyed incoming drones with mechanical precision. The Krell had never encountered weapons like these. The Galactic Accord favored energy weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. Their tactics relied on defense and deterrence. Human weapons had no such limitations. They were designed with a single purpose: to kill the enemy as efficiently as possible. A Krell cruiser exploded as a railgun round tore through its reactor core. A carrier split in half when 3 nuclear missiles detonated against its hull. Drone fighters swarmed toward the human ships, only to be shredded by automated defense turrets that never missed and never stopped firing. Kalira watched the battle on the display screens and felt something between horror and awe. The humans fought with a ferocity that seemed impossible. Their ships moved with practiced coordination, each one covering the others and exploiting any weakness in the Krell formation. When a destroyer took critical damage, its captain ordered the crew to evacuate, then deliberately rammed the crippled ship into a Krell command vessel. Both ships vanished in a massive explosion that lit up the darkness of space. The human crew sacrificed themselves without hesitation to take out a priority target. It was madness. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. Fighter craft launched from the human carriers and dove into the swarm of Krell drones. The pilots flew with reckless courage, weaving through enemy fire and striking at vulnerable points. Their communications channel was open and Kalira could hear them talking to each other. They joked and laughed even as they engaged in deadly combat. One pilot called out that he had gotten 3 kills and challenged his wingman to beat his score. Another whooped with joy as she destroyed a Krell bomber. They treated the battle like a game, but their skill was undeniable. Every movement was calculated. Every shot was precise. They were having fun while fighting for their lives. The Krell tried to adapt to the human tactics, but they were too slow. Their strength had always been overwhelming numbers and relentless pressure. Against an enemy that fought with such violence and coordination, their advantage evaporated. Human ships pushed deeper into the Krell formation, targeting command vessels and supply ships. The Krell lines began to falter and then to break. Individual ships tried to flee, but the human destroyers hunted them down with ruthless efficiency. Morrison had made his doctrine clear: no mercy for those who preyed on the helpless. The Krell would be eliminated completely or not at all. Within 3 hours, the battle was over. The orbital space around Valerian Prime was clear of Krell ships. Debris floated where the enemy armada had been. A few Krell vessels tried to retreat into faster-than-light travel, but human ships pursued them and destroyed them before they could escape. The Terran fleet regrouped and began dealing with the remaining Krell ground forces. Dropships descended through the atmosphere carrying Marines and heavy equipment. The Valari watched from their bunkers as human soldiers deployed across the planet. Kalira received a message from the Vanguard requesting her presence at the surface. She emerged from the bunker with a small group of government officials expecting to meet brutal conquerors fresh from battle. Instead, she found herself in what remained of the capital district facing a human who smiled at her with genuine warmth. He was shorter than she expected and stocky with muscles that showed even through his uniform. His face had lines of stress and fatigue, but his eyes were kind. He extended his hand in the human greeting gesture and spoke in heavily accented but understandable Valari. "Ambassador Kalira, I am Commander Alan Price of the Terran Marines. We got your message. Sorry it took us a while to get here. Let us talk about how we can help." Kalira stared at him in confusion. This was not what she had expected. The humans had just torn through the Krell fleet with devastating efficiency. They had fought with a violence that shocked even someone who had studied warfare. Yet here was their commander speaking gently and offering help. She took his hand carefully, aware of how fragile her own fingers were compared to his strength. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you for coming. We thought we would die here." Price shook his head. "Not on our watch, Ambassador. We have medical supplies, food, and shelter ready to distribute. Our engineers are standing by to help with repairs, and our Marines will clear out any remaining Krell forces. You are safe now." Over the following hours, Kalira watched as human forces spread across the planet. Marines moved through the ruined cities, pulling Valari survivors from collapsed buildings and providing first aid. Field hospitals were established where human medics worked alongside the few surviving Valari doctors. Supply drops brought food and water and temporary shelters. The humans moved with efficiency and compassion, treating the Valari with respect and gentleness. Soldiers who hours earlier had been killing, Krell with brutal effectiveness now carried injured children to safety and comforted terrified civilians. The contrast was jarring, and Kalira struggled to reconcile what she was seeing with what she knew about humanity. These were supposed to be dangerous predators, too violent for civilized contact. Yet they were showing more compassion than the supposedly peaceful species of the Galactic Accord, who had abandoned the Valari to their fate. She spent the day moving between survivor camps and speaking with both Valari and humans. Everywhere she went, she saw the same thing. Humans helping anyone who needed it without hesitation or demand for payment. By evening, the immediate crisis had passed. The remaining Krell forces on the planet had been eliminated or driven into hiding. Thousands of Valari had been rescued and given shelter. The wounded were receiving treatment and the dead were being recovered for proper burial. Kalira stood on a hill overlooking the ruined capital and watched the sunset. The sky was still stained with smoke, but the fires had been extinguished. Commander Price joined her, carrying 2 containers of what he explained was coffee, a human stimulant drink. He offered her one, and they stood in silence for a moment. "Why did you come?" Kalira asked quietly. "The Galactic Accord placed your people under quarantine. They feared you. They rejected you. Yet you came when we called. Why?" Price took a long drink of his coffee and considered the question. His expression was thoughtful and sad. "Because we know what it is like to be afraid," he said. "Every human alive carries genetic memories of being hunted. Our ancestors survived by protecting each other, by standing together against impossible odds. When we heard your message, we heard ourselves. We heard people who were desperate and alone, and we could not ignore that. We came because it was the right thing to do." Kalira felt tears sting her eyes. She had been so afraid of what the humans would be. She had imagined conquerors and tyrants. Instead, she had found warriors who fought not because they loved violence, but because they could not stand to watch innocents suffer. She looked at Price and saw not a predator but a protector. The humans were dangerous, yes. Their capacity for violence was real. But so was their capacity for compassion. They were not simple brutes driven by instinct. They were complex beings capable of both great destruction. The days following the battle brought a strange new normalcy to Valerian Prime. Human forces established a garrison and began the long process of helping the Valari rebuild. Kalira found herself spending more and more time with the humans, trying to understand them. She attended their briefings and ate meals with their soldiers and listened to their stories. What she learned both fascinated and disturbed her. These were people shaped by a world that wanted them dead. Terra was a nightmare of extreme weather, dangerous predators and diseases that could kill in hours. Humanity had clawed its way to the top of the food chain through intelligence cooperation and an absolute refusal to give up. One evening, Kalira sat with Captain Nina, Lawson, a fighter pilot who had distinguished herself in the battle. Nina was young and energetic with short dark hair and a quick smile. She explained what it meant to be human while they shared a meal in the temporary mess hall. "We are persistence hunters," she said. "Back on Terra, our ancestors would chase prey for days until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. We are not the fastest or the strongest, but we never stop. That is what we do. We endure, we adapt, we survive, and when something threatens our people or our allies, we fight with everything we have because we know what happens if we lose." Kalira met others as, well, Dr. Helen Carter was a field medic who worked 18-hour shifts treating wounded Valari. She had gentle hands and an endless supply of patience even when exhausted. Sergeant Paul Hayes was a gruff Marine who spent his free time teaching Valari children card games to distract them from their trauma. Lieutenant Greg Turner admitted he had been terrified during the battle, but kept fighting because his crew depended on him. Each human she met showed her a different facet of humanity. They were not simple creatures. They contained multitudes, fear and courage, violence and compassion, aggression and love. What became clear was that humans were not violent by choice. They were violent by necessity. Their world had given them no other option. But they had also developed strong bonds of family and friendship and loyalty. They protected their own with ferocity, but they extended that protection to anyone they considered worthy. The Valari had called for help and the humans had answered. Now the Valari were under their protection, and that meant something profound to these Deathworlders. It meant commitment. It meant sacrifice. It meant standing between the innocent and those who would harm them no matter the cost. Kalira attended a memorial service held by the Terran fleet for those who died in the battle. Over 300 human personnel had been lost saving Valerian Prime. The service was held in the main hangar of the Vanguard, and every available person attended. Admiral Morrison stood at a podium and read each name aloud. His voice never wavered, but Kalira could see the pain in his eyes. These were his people. His responsibility. He had sent them into battle knowing some would not return. The assembled humans stood in perfect silence honoring their fallen. There was no music, no ceremony, just names spoken with respect and remembrance. After the service, Morrison spoke with Kalira privately. They walked through the corridors of the massive ship, while crew members saluted and went about their duties. "We do not take war lightly," Ambassador Morrison said. "Every person we lost had families. They had dreams and futures. We paid in blood to save your people, and we would do it again. But understand this, we are not heroes. We are just people who decided that some things are worth fighting for. Freedom is worth fighting for. Life is worth fighting for. The right of peaceful species to exist without fear is worth fighting for. That is why we came." Kalira felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she truly understood. The humans did not come because they were violent savages who enjoyed war. They came because they could not stand by and watch innocents suffer. Their capacity for violence was matched and perhaps exceeded by their capacity for empathy. They felt pain when others felt pain. They felt anger when they witnessed injustice. And they acted on those feelings with the determination that most species had lost or never possessed. The Valari had bred out their violent instincts and in doing so had made themselves helpless. The humans had kept theirs and learned to control them to direct them toward worthy causes. As weeks passed, Kalira became a bridge between her people and the humans. She helped negotiate the terms of the continued human presence on Valerian Prime. The Terran fleet would leave a small garrison to protect against future Krell attacks. They would provide military training to any Valari willing to learn. They would share defensive technology and tactical knowledge. In return, they asked only for supplies and a place to establish a forward base. It was the most generous treaty Kalira had ever seen. The humans were not conquerors. They truly wanted nothing more than to help, but questions remained. As the Terran fleet prepared to depart, Kalira found herself alone with Admiral Morrison one final time. She had to ask the question that had been haunting her since the first day. Why were you quarantined? Why did the Galactic Accord keep humanity isolated? Morrison's expression hardened. He looked out at the stars visible through the observation window and his jaw clenched. Because we scared them, he said quietly. 2 centuries ago, when we first developed faster-than-light travel, we reached out to the Accord. We were excited to meet other species to join the galactic community. We had so much hope. He paused and Kalira waited. When they evaluated us, they saw a species shaped by violence. They saw our history of warfare. They saw our competitive nature, our death world adaptations. They decided we were too dangerous to interact with. They told us we needed to prove we had evolved beyond our predatory instincts. We were hurt. We were angry. But we understood. So we respected the quarantine. We kept to ourselves. We built our own civilization. We watched from a distance as the Accord expanded, always peaceful, always cooperative. And we wondered what would happen when they finally met something that did not value peace. Now we know, Morrison continued. They were unprepared. They had no answer for the Krell or for any other aggressive species. Their philosophy worked only as long as everyone agreed to be peaceful. The moment someone decided to take by force what they wanted, the entire system collapsed. You called and we answered. That is all that matters now. But understand this, Ambassador. We are not interested in proving ourselves to the Accord. We are not seeking their approval or their membership. We will help those who need help and defend those who cannot defend themselves. If the Accord wants our friendship, they can earn it. But we will not beg for acceptance from people who rejected us. Kalira felt shame wash over her. The Galactic Accord had judged humanity without truly knowing them. They had seen the surface and made assumptions. They had valued theoretical purity over practical reality. And when crisis came, they had nothing to offer but empty words and philosophical debates. The humans, meanwhile, had spent 2 centuries building a civilization that valued both peace and the ability to defend it. They had not abandoned their warrior nature. They had refined it. They had made themselves into protectors rather than conquerors. And the galaxy had missed out on 200 years of potential friendship because of prejudice and fear. I will tell them, Kalira said. I will go to the other Accord worlds and tell them what you did here. I will tell them who you really are. Not the monsters they imagined, but the heroes we needed. Morrison smiled sadly. Thank you, Ambassador. But words will not be enough. The Accord will need to see for themselves. They will need to decide if they want a galaxy where dangerous species are welcomed, or if they prefer to remain isolated in their peaceful bubble. Either way, humanity will continue doing what we do. We will protect those who cannot protect themselves. We will stand against tyranny and oppression. And we will prove through our actions, not our words, what we truly are. The Vanguard departed the next day along with most of the fleet. They left behind a garrison of 200 Marines and support personnel under Commander Price. Kalira watched the great ships vanish into faster-than-light travel and felt both gratitude and sadness. The humans had saved her world and asked for nothing in return. They had shown compassion to strangers and given their lives for people they had never met. And they had done it all while knowing the galaxy feared and rejected them. That kind of selflessness was rare. That kind of courage was precious. And Kalira was determined to make sure the rest of the galaxy understood what they had been missing. She began preparing for her mission. She would travel to every Accord world that would listen. She would speak to councils and assemblies and anyone with the power to change minds. She would tell the story of Valerian Prime and the Deathworlders who saved it. She would advocate for ending the quarantine and inviting humanity into the galactic community. It would not be easy. Centuries of prejudice did not vanish overnight. But she had to try. The galaxy needed the humans whether it knew it or not. The Krell were still out there. Other threats would come. And when they did, the Accord would need warriors who understood both violence and mercy. They would need the Deathworlders. News of what happened at Valerian Prime spread across the Galactic Accord like wildfire. Species that had been hiding from the Krell suddenly had hope. The story of how humanity's fleet crushed the swarm in hours became legendary, growing with each retelling. Some versions claimed the humans destroyed 1,000 Krell ships. Others said they did it without losing a single vessel. The truth was impressive enough, but the myth served a purpose. They gave the terrified populations of the Accord something to believe in. They showed that the Krell could be beaten. That survival was possible. Kalira traveled from world to world carrying her message. She spoke to councils and assemblies. She appeared on broadcasts and gave interviews. Everywhere she went, she told the same story. The humans were not the monsters the Accord feared. They were dangerous, yes, but that danger could be directed toward worthy goals. They fought with ferocity, but also with honor. They asked for nothing in return for their help. The galaxy needed to reconsider its position on humanity. The quarantine needed to end. The Accord needed allies who could actually fight. The response was mixed and heated. Some species desperate for protection immediately petitioned humanity for defense treaties. They wanted human fleets in their systems and human soldiers training their forces. They saw what happened at Valerian Prime and wanted that protection for themselves. Other species, particularly those in the Accord leadership, remained deeply suspicious. They worried about what it would mean to invite predators into their civilization. They questioned whether humanity could be trusted with power. They feared that today's saviors might become tomorrow's conquerors. The debate reached its peak when a grand convocation was called on Harmony Station, the capital of the Galactic Accord. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in the massive assembly hall. The chamber was a marvel of architecture with crystalline walls that caught and reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. Delegates sat in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. At the highest tier sat the High Council, the leaders of the most influential species. Chancellor Voran of the Mentari held the position of Accord chairman. The Mentari were renowned for their intellectual achievements and philosophical traditions. Voran himself had been one of the architects of humanity's quarantine 2 centuries earlier. Kalira attended the convocation, as did Commander Alan Price, who had been chosen to represent Terra's interests. Price stood on the speaking platform looking small against the grandeur of the hall, but his voice carried clearly. He spoke simply and directly. "We understand your concerns. You look at us and see predators. You see our history of warfare and our capacity for violence. You worry that we will turn that violence against you. Those fears are not unreasonable. But consider this. The Krell have destroyed 12 Accord worlds in the past year alone. How many more will fall while you debate? We are not asking to rule you. We are offering to stand beside you, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. All we ask in return is respect and partnership." Chancellor Voran rose to respond, and the chamber fell silent. His voice was measured and cold. "You speak well, Commander, but words are easy. Actions reveal truth. You saved Valerian Prime, and that is commendable. But it proves exactly why we quarantined humanity. You solved a military problem with overwhelming violence. You destroyed the Krell fleet utterly. You showed no mercy, gave no quarter. Today you use that violence to save lives. Tomorrow, what if you decide we are the problem? What if you decide the Accord stands in the way of your goals? How do we protect ourselves from you once we have invited you in?" The chamber erupted in argument. Species that had suffered under the Krell shouted their support for humanity. Those who remained safe argued for maintaining the status quo. The debate went on for hours with no resolution. Kalira watched with growing frustration. She wanted to scream at them, wanted to make them see what she had seen, but she remained silent, knowing that anger would not change minds. The convocation adjourned with no decision made. The Accord was fracturing, torn between fear of humanity and fear of the next threat they could not handle alone. The debate became moot 3 days later, when the Krell launched their counterattack. Having learned from their defeat at Valerian Prime, they came with overwhelming force. 3 Accord worlds were struck simultaneously, including Harmony Station itself. The Krell had brought everything they had left, determined to crush any resistance and restore their dominance. Their ships appeared in the system without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in coordinated assault formations. Alarms screamed through Harmony Station as the defense fleet scrambled to respond. The station's defenses were formidable, but they were designed for deterrence, not sustained combat. Krell ships poured fire into the shields while boarding craft launched toward the hull. The convocation descended into chaos as delegates fled toward evacuation ships. Kalira found herself caught in a corridor packed with panicking aliens, all trying to reach the docking bays. Security forces tried to maintain order, but it was a losing battle. The Krell were inside the station and moving fast. Kalira heard weapons fire and screaming. She saw Krell warriors tearing through bulkheads with their razor-sharp limbs. The end was coming. Then she heard a familiar voice cutting through the chaos. "Everyone stay calm. We are getting you out." Commander Price appeared at the intersection ahead, leading a squad of human Marines. His armor was battered and scorched, but his eyes were steady. The Marines formed a defensive perimeter and began directing civilians toward a secure evacuation route. Price saw Kalira and nodded. "Ambassador, good to see you. Stay close and we will get you to safety." Kalira wanted to ask why he was here, how he was here, but there was no time. The Krell were coming. The Marines opened fire as Krell warriors rounded the corner. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Plasma bolts and bullets tore through the insectoid attackers. The humans fought with practiced efficiency, covering each other and falling back in good order while protecting the civilians. Price shouted orders coordinating the defense while personally carrying wounded delegates to safety. Kalira found herself pushed along with the crowd, keeping her head down as weapons fire filled the air above her. They reached a docking bay where a human ship waited. The Marines herded everyone aboard, then followed, covering the retreat until the last second. The ship pulled away from the station just as Krell forces reached the bay. Through the viewport, Kalira watched the battle raging in space around Harmony Station. The Accord defense fleet was being overwhelmed. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes. The station's shields flickered and failed. It was a disaster. The heart of the Galactic Accord was falling. Then she saw something that made her breath catch. Ships were appearing at the edge of the system. Dozens of them, hundreds. The Terran defense fleet had arrived in force. Admiral Morrison had brought everything he had. The human fleet swept into the battle like an avenging storm. They did not hesitate or negotiate. They simply attacked with overwhelming force. Kalira had seen them fight before, but this was different. This was humanity showing the full extent of their military power. The Krell armada, which had seemed unstoppable moments before, began to crumble under the assault. Human ships worked in perfect coordination, targeting command vessels and disrupting Krell formations. Fighters swarmed through the enemy lines. Marines launched boarding actions against Krell carriers. Within an hour, the tide had turned. Within 2, the Krell were retreating. Within 3, the system was clear. Harmony Station was saved, though badly damaged. Human damage control teams worked alongside station personnel to restore systems and treat casualties. Kalira made her way back to the station on one of the rescue ships. She found Chancellor Vorin in what remained of the medical bay. He was injured but alive. A human medic was treating a deep cut on his arm. The Chancellor looked old and tired. When he saw Kalira approach, he tried to sit up straighter. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I owe them all an apology." Commander Price appeared at the entrance to the medical bay. He was still in his battered armor, covered in soot and blood. He looked exhausted. Vorin called to him and Price approached. "Chancellor," Price said with a nod. Vorin looked at the human for a long moment. "You stayed," Price said. "Even me, despite my words against you. You stayed to protect us." Price shrugged. "You are people, Chancellor. That is all that matters. You want to be afraid of us, that is your right. But we will keep showing up when you need us because that is who we are." Vorin reached out with his uninjured hand and Price took it carefully. "I was wrong," the Chancellor said. "We were all wrong. We judged you by your capacity for violence and failed to see your capacity for compassion. We bred out our aggressive instincts and made ourselves helpless. You kept yours and learned to control them, to use them for worthy causes. The galaxy needs you. I see that now. Will you forgive an old fool who let fear cloud his judgment?" Price smiled. "Nothing to forgive, Chancellor. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." Vorin nodded slowly. "Then let us build something better. Together." The vote to end humanity's quarantine came 1 week after the battle for Harmony Station. The Galactic Accord convened again, this time in a temporary facility, while the main station underwent repairs. The chamber was smaller and less grand, but the moment felt more important than any gathering in Accord history. Chancellor Vorin himself proposed the motion, speaking with a conviction that surprised many. He laid out his arguments clearly. The Accord had been wrong to isolate humanity. Their fear had been based on surface observations and prejudice. The humans had proven through their actions that they could be trusted. More than that, they were necessary. The galaxy was dangerous, and the Accord needed allies who understood how to survive in it. The debate was brief. Most species had already made up their minds. They had seen what the humans could do. They had watched humanity save Accord worlds twice while asking for nothing in return. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only a handful of species abstained, still uncertain but no longer actively opposed. The quarantine was lifted. Humanity was invited to join the Galactic Accord as full members with all rights and responsibilities that entailed. When the results were announced, the chamber erupted in cheers. Kalira found tears streaming down her face. She had fought for this, had traveled across the galaxy advocating for it. And now it was real. Admiral Morrison accepted the invitation on behalf of humanity. He stood before the assembly looking uncomfortable in formal dress uniform, rather than his usual combat gear. His speech was characteristically brief. "We are honored by this invitation. We look forward to building lasting friendships with the species of the Accord. But understand this. We will not be your attack dogs. We will fight alongside you, not for you. We will defend the innocent and stand against tyranny wherever we find it. We expect respect, equality, and partnership. The days of fearing us must end if we are to build something better together. We are not perfect. We will make mistakes. But we will always try to do what is right. That is our promise to you. The years that followed were not easy. Integrating humanity into the Galactic Accord proved complicated. Cultural differences created misunderstandings. Some humans found Accord bureaucracy frustrating. Some aliens found human directness rude. There were incidents and arguments and moments when it seemed the whole thing might fall apart. But both sides worked at it. Humans learned to be more patient. Aliens learned to be more direct. Slowly, understanding grew. Trade routes opened between human and alien worlds. Cultural exchanges began. Human students attended Accord universities. Alien scholars studied on Terra. People began to see each other as individuals rather than representatives of their species. The military integration proved more successful. Joint defense initiatives were established combining human tactical knowledge with Accord technology. Terran instructors trained Accord security forces, teaching them how to fight effectively. The transformation was remarkable. Species that had been helpless against the Krell learned to defend themselves. They would never match human ferocity, but they no longer needed to. They learned strategy and coordination. They learned that war was not about being the most violent, but about being the most effective. The Krell tested these new defenses several times and were repelled each time with increasing ease. Kalira became a permanent liaison between the Velari and Terra. She divided her time between both worlds, fostering friendship and cooperation. On Terra, she walked through cities that seemed impossibly crowded and chaotic compared to the ordered beauty of Valerian Prime. She met human families and learned about their lives. She discovered that humans had the same hopes and fears as her own people. They wanted safety for their children. They wanted meaningful work. They wanted to leave the galaxy better than they found it. The main difference was that humans were willing to fight for these things, while the Valari had hoped they would simply happen. Her friendship with Captain Nina Lawson deepened over time. The fighter pilot taught Kalira about human culture, while Kalira shared Valari philosophy and art. They were an unlikely pair. Nina was bold and aggressive, constantly seeking new challenges. Kalira was thoughtful and cautious, preferring to observe before acting. But they balanced each other, and their friendship became a symbol of what was possible when different species truly tried to understand each other. Other friendships formed across the Accord, humans and aliens working together, learning from each other, building something new. Then 5 years after humanity joined the Accord, a new threat emerged. Long-range probes detected something at the edge of explored space, a massive fleet of unknown origin heading toward Accord territory. The ships were enormous, dwarfing even the largest human dreadnoughts. Their energy signatures were unlike anything recorded. They did not respond to hails or attempts at communication. Analysis of their trajectory showed they would reach the first inhabited systems within months. The Accord convened an emergency session to discuss the threat. The identity of the newcomers was revealed by ancient records found in Accord archives. They were called the Architects. According to fragmentary accounts, they had ruled a vast empire billions of years ago, before mysteriously vanishing from known space. The legends describe them as builders who shaped worlds and altered stars. They were said to possess technology so advanced it seemed like magic. If the Architects had returned, their intentions were unknown, but their power was undeniable. The Accord scientists estimated that a single Architect vessel could destroy an entire fleet. The approaching armada contained hundreds of ships. Fear gripped the Accord. Species that had just learned to defend themselves against the Krell now faced something far worse. The debates in the council chamber were grim. Some advocated fleeing deeper into unexplored space. Others argued for attempting diplomacy. A few suggested surrender before hostilities began. Chancellor Voren called for calm and looked to Admiral Morrison, who studied the tactical data with a thoughtful expression. "Can you stop them?" the Chancellor asked quietly. Everyone in the chamber held their breath, waiting for the answer. Morrison was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was honest and direct. "I do not know if we can win. The Architects appear to have technology centuries beyond ours. Fighting them could be suicide. But I know we will try, and I know we will not try alone. Together we have a chance." A part we have none. The Accord has spent these past years learning to fight, learning to stand together. Now we will see if those lessons were enough. We will face this threat united. Human and alien standing shoulder to shoulder. Whatever comes, we face it together. The decision was made. A fleet would be assembled. The largest combined force in galactic history. Every species would contribute ships and personnel. Human dreadnoughts would fly alongside Valari science vessels. Mentari analytical ships would coordinate with Terran tactical frigates. Species that had barely met would now fight side by side. The fleet gathered at a staging point near the projected intercept coordinates. Kalira found herself aboard the flagship, a joint command vessel appropriately named Unity. The bridge was a marvel of cooperation. Human and alien officers worked at adjacent stations. The command staff included representatives from a dozen species. Commander Price served as tactical officer, bringing years of combat experience to the role. Chancellor Voren was present as diplomatic advisor, hoping for a peaceful resolution but preparing for war. Captain Nina Lawson led a mixed squadron of human and alien fighters. Dr. Helen Carter commanded the medical facilities ready to treat casualties from any species. The crew worked together with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible years earlier. They had learned to trust each other, to rely on each other. The old divisions of predator and prey, of dangerous and safe, had faded. Now they were simply people working toward a common goal. As the Architect fleet drew closer, Admiral Morrison addressed all personnel on every ship. His words were broadcast across hundreds of vessels and heard by millions of beings. We do not know what we face. We do not know if we will prevail. But we know this. We stand together, human and alien, Deathworlder and Gardenworlder. We are one fleet, one people. Whatever comes, we face it together. For the Accord, for our homes, for the future we will build, not just for ourselves but for generations yet to come. We fight not because we love war but because we love peace enough to defend it. Show them what we have become. Show them the strength of unity. The assembled crews cheered. The sound echoed across communication channels in dozens of languages. Kalira stood on the bridge of Unity and felt tears on her face. She remembered the desperate call she had sent years ago. She had asked for help from the stars and received the Deathworlders fleet. She had been terrified of what they might be. Now she stood beside them as an equal and a friend. The humans had taught the Accord that strength and compassion could coexist. The Accord had taught humanity that there were ways to solve problems beyond violence. Together they had created something new, a galactic civilization that could defend itself while remaining true to its ideals. The Architect fleet appeared on sensors, and the Unity led the combined forces forward. Kalira watched the display showing hundreds of allied ships moving in perfect formation. She did not know what would happen next. The Architects might be hostile. They might be peaceful,